This program is sponsored by Tilson Solicitors.
Assalamu alaikum, hello and welcome to another episode of The Legal Forum with me, Lee Clark. Now, The Legal Forum is a programme where each week we discuss common topics in layman terms to help guide you with legal advice. Breaking down the complex language of law, The Legal Forum will also highlight real-life cases and scenarios. Please do bear in mind the views and opinions expressed in Legal Forum should be considered for informational purposes only and not case-specific legal advice. All topics are discussed in a generic nature, and it's important that you either consult with a CAB, law centre or a solicitor before relying on it. Now, today's very important topic will be on immigration. Being such a big sector from dealing with many different nationalities and circumstances that covers work, spouse and visitor visas, we'll be being in touch with a few parts of the immigration law today. I'd like to welcome a solicitor, Sandeep Chandy, who's going to have more than 13 years of experience in this sector, who's agreed to answer the most common questions in relation to marriage visa rules and for people here without visas. Very warm welcome to you. Welcome to the show.
Thank you very much.
So first time on TV, we'll be going very light and nice and easy with you, Sandeep. What are the kind of current regulations and requirements as far as visas are concerned currently under British law here?
The scope is massive for immigration and change is constant. Immigration rules change sometimes every few weeks. Now, the specific changes that came in about 7 years ago is 2012 on quite a wide range of areas. But if we drill down on looking at spouse visas in particular at the moment, the rules have been in place for 7 years to sponsor a partner or children to come into the UK from any country. If they're outside of the European Union, there's a financial requirement to meet. So the basic level is 18,600. That's the sponsor, the person here, the British or settled person has to have that level of earning before they can sponsor a spouse.
So that's an annual income, not an amount of money in a bank account?
An annual income. So
okay.
the old rules before 2012 where they would look at savings, where they would look at a job offer, where they'd look at support from family members. You could have a person, a British national who's in university, has got married abroad, wants to bring their spouse over. The rules allowed you to put other things forward that the embassy or the decision maker, the Home Office, could accept. But as things stand now, it's a very specific requirement that you're in employment or self-employment or you've got specified income. And if you can't demonstrate you have it, it's a ground to refuse the application.
So basically, as opposed to lots of areas or grey areas that maybe were in the past, it literally is almost, as cut and dried as that basic factor.
People say the reason for the new rules was to limit immigration, limit spouses coming over and families joining each other, and there's been some truth in that, because if you look at the figures, the numbers of applications from 2012 onwards, the period between 13 and 14 were significant, the refusals. 30,000, I think, in that period alone, which is a massive jump from the previous immigration rules. So they have really tried to limit the control of immigration, and that's definitely one of the results of it.
Now, if somebody doesn't meet the criteria or have certain criteria in place or specifics in place, is there any way that somebody can still apply for a visa if they don't meet that headline mention that you said earlier on?
They can. The rules that came in have been subject to challenge literally as soon as they came in 2012. But it did take all the way until just a year and a half, 2 years ago, and for it to reach the Supreme Court, for them to consider what the requirements were, whether they were fair, whether they discriminated against certain nationalities or groups of people. And their conclusion was, they sided with the Home Office and the government that the rules were legal, but they did say some protections need to be put in place for certain circumstances. So in particular, if you've got children, the decision maker has to bear that in mind. They then have to look at other possible forms of income, so the ones that don't meet the specifications, the ones that they are looking for to qualify. That's where you start etching towards the old immigration rules, where you can put forward savings that they wouldn't otherwise consider, or a job offer that you might have coming shortly, or family who can support you in those circumstances. So there is some flexibility built in, but we know it's a battle with the Home Office and the embassy. They don't budge easily. Their aim is still the same, to refuse if they can. And if you don't fit their criteria as it's specified, you're mostly going to expect a refusal decision in those circumstances.
Is there a way somebody could maybe, with the powers of the internet these days, somebody can check, do almost like a dummy appraisal to see whether they and their current standings would be accepted? Or is there like a trial area somebody could go to just to see whether they would get a visa?
I think we all wish there was, but the simple answer is there isn't. The immigration rules are very complicated. They've not become simpler since the changes in 2012, and I mean, you'll have court judges commenting on that in the last several years, that they've become Byzantine in nature. They're built to be complex. They're built so that people get confused and people can't handle these applications on their own, and will have to make repeat applications and challenge them through the court process. So it's very difficult. It really does require someone to meet an advisor, meet a solicitor, someone who can sit down with them and assess their circumstances, find out what their aims are, timing, and what family members need to come over, and be sure that an application is going to be successful or not.
I mean, when you think about it in those terms, why do they make it that way? Why can't it be simple? Why, if you said that it confuses people with jargon and all of the kind of hoops that they have to jump through, why does it have to be as complex as that? Or was that a hard question to answer?
It becomes into politics. These changes, specific changes in this area, came in 2012. It was a new Conservative Liberal Democrat government. I think the Liberal Democrats hindered the Conservatives some of the changes they wanted to make, but they were designed, these rules, to limit immigration. That has been the result. We know of many families where the partner's stuck abroad, hasn't been able to join their spouse here. Children are separated from a mother or father who's in the UK. So I think there was a political aim behind some of the changes, but the task ahead is to make sure we work around them and qualify.
So when you're looking at individual case scenarios and you have a client or somebody coming to see you and you're with your 13 years of experience, is there kind of, not that it goes into automation that you do it without even looking half the time, but is every case different in a way? That's
definitely the case. Everyone's circumstances are different. You'll have occasional person who does a straightforward 9-to-5 job, monthly pay, and it's one person coming, their spouse wants to come over. Can be fairly straightforward. Then you get people who are self-employed in their own company, and then the rules become very complex. It can take a number of hours to present that evidence forward and have it accepted. So it is all case by case. Every case does need to be assessed separately.
Is there a kind of a window of I mean, this is a key question you probably get asked all the time, and timings of visa applications, I suppose, because everyone's different. There isn't an exact time frame, but when somebody comes to meet you, Sandeep, for the first time, what time frame in their mind should they have that this could or would roughly take?
I mean, if the financial circumstances are straightforward, if the other requirements are met, evidence that needs to be gathered can be got together. There's an English test for spouses to do to come into the country that can hold things up to some degree. It can take a few weeks for the test to be passed. If things are straightforward, it's feasible to have a partner over within 4 to 6 weeks. Okay. It's happened on many occasions. If things aren't as simple, we have to do some advanced planning. So if their employment circumstances don't fulfill the criteria, people have to change their ways. They have to change the manner of their bookkeeping if they're a self-employed person. The Home Office guidance says this specifically. If you don't bank the money that you earn as a self-employed individual, we expect you to change your ways, which means wait a year, file a tax return, and then you can now qualify for a visa. So advanced planning is needed, and it can take as short as 4 or 6 weeks, but it can take a lot longer than that also.
Now, you mentioned at the start, that answer that you gave me there is that people take an English test. Is the English test A, complicated, B, is it taken in their home country wherever they are coming to the UK from, or is it a case of coming into a classroom here in the United Kingdom and taking that test? How does it work?
There's 6 main assessment levels, starting all the way from A1 to C1, and everyone will fall within that scope, which is the most basic English at level A1. Speaking and listening is what is assessed by the test. So someone comes for the first time only needs a basic grasp of English to be able to understand the question and give a response, and have a brief basic conversation with someone. It's not a very difficult test, but you'll still have circumstances where people have just not studied very well or are just not able in the language, and there's not very many exceptions to the test. It's only really on health or mental condition, or if you pass the age of 65. Okay. So it's difficult, but the test has to be passed.
Now, if a family is, say, in another country, obviously planning to come to the UK, and one of the members of the family comes here, can the spouse come to this country and leave their children with their partner in the country that they've come to the UK from?
Yeah, it's a misconception, and people think that the whole family needs to join at the same time. Yeah. It's not always possible. We have cases where children are in school and we don't want to take them out at the present time. Or coming back to what we were discussing, the financial requirement. If you can't meet it, it changes with children. So If you can't bring everyone over in one go, you can bring your partner over, and then later on, I mean, most people won't want to leave their children behind, but it's possible, and it has happened in many cases.
Now, if children are born abroad, obviously then coming to the UK, do all children who are in that situation, i.e. born not in the United Kingdom, need a visa to come here?
Not always. And again, this is it's something that people don't always know.
Okay.
We have an example of one case, a client who'd come to us who had applied for his spouse and 3 children and paid all the fees and qualified on the financial requirement for all of them, which is significant. It's much more than the basic level of earnings you have to, it jumps up per child. And there was no need because he was British in the UK, the father, the sponsor, and because his children were born wherever they were born, but because he was British, they were British by birth. They all qualified as British citizens. They didn't need a visa at all. So it's not always necessary for every child to have a visa to come to the country. It really depends on the family circumstances. That really must be assessed before they jump into making an application.
So if he'd have come to see you in the first place, obviously, or situations like that, and the cost implications for one, stress and personal anguish and everything else, could have been alleviated because they get the right guidance.
Yeah. I mean, there's the fees are significant. I mean, there's an earnings threshold to pass because in that example, the mother and the 3 children, but more importantly, the Home Office fees, the embassy fees, they increase annually. They've increased to the point that, again, it's trying to hinder immigration. So, yeah, it would have been a big difference for him if he had come to us in advance.
So you get to the UK, you're here, and you have maybe a temporary visa or a semi-permanent visa or whatever visa is the time that you've got. If you're overstaying your visa or if you're here, past the time that you should be, what happens to you then? Do you then literally get that black mark against your name and you can't reapply for another visa, or how complex can that be?
There are options for people who've overstayed. So you have 2 types of people. One individual group is people who've entered the country illegally, under the radar, not been picked up on the way in, and there's a number of different ways that can happen. And then you have people who have come legally to the UK and then end up overstaying. That could be they came as a visitor and overstayed, or they were previously on a long-term visa as a student or a work permit holder, or possibly even a spouse, and the marriage hasn't worked out and they've ended up staying longer. Now, there are options for them. They're not straightforward. The main rule, again, it all goes back to 2012 when the immigration rules changed. Previously, someone who'd been here for 14 years would qualify for, it used to be indefinitely if you become settled. They changed that to 20 years. So that's the time limit someone needs to have lived here if they have no visa today, as things stand, to qualify for another visa.
So if you haven't been in the UK for 20 years, there's more hoops to jump through, more boxes to tick as regards to applications, I suppose.
Yeah, anyone under the age, anyone who hasn't been here 20 years, there is the option of them applying on human rights grounds at any time. But as well as that, there is another part of the private life rule. So someone who hasn't been here 20 years, but under 20 years, can qualify if they can show that there's obstacles to them reintegrating to their country they would have to go back to, their home country.
Yeah.
But it's a very difficult burden to pass. The Home Office basically expects you to show it's impossible for you to go back to your own country. And for someone who probably spent most of their childhood or growing up in that country, and certainly more time than they've been in the UK, it's very difficult to prove to the Home Office or to have the Home Office accept that they can't go back to somewhere where they've still got family, cultural, language, religious links. So the answer from the Home Office in most of those cases normally would be no.
I suppose unless there's something specific happening in that particular country at that particular time, then obviously certain conditions may change on those sort of things. If somebody, this is probably a question that it's a hard one to answer, certainly maybe a hard one to ask in some cases, but if somebody is here illegally and then wants to make sure that they fit in with all the requirements of British law, but as you said, may have come in under the radar in whatever guise and whatever way they've done that. What's the best bit of advice from you, Sandeep, to them, or to help maybe family members to help them as to how they can stay in the United Kingdom legally, if it's possible?
There's no easy answer to that question. It's a question that comes up quite often. The examples from individuals are many. Some of them will make applications to the Home Office and attempt to resolve their status. Others will just remain completely under the radar. The risk when you apply to the Home Office and you refuse is enforcement action starts. So there's no easy answer to the question. It really depends on individual circumstances. Sometimes it is best to approach the Home Office and put your case forward. If, for example, you've got trouble in the country you come from, or the situation there has changed, you may qualify for asylum, refugee status. Otherwise, on many other occasions, a lot of people will remain under the radar until they think they can qualify.
I suppose a lot of people's fears probably will be as soon as they do pop their head up and say, hi, I'm here, that they'll be taken away from family, friends, and the situation that they're currently in, I suppose.
Yeah, I mean, the circumstances are very different for an individual person or an adult couple compared with an individual or an adult couple with children. The Home Office treatment is very different. Children don't get detained in immigration centres. It's a policy that's been in place since 2011. So it's unlikely that any enforcement action can happen fast or quickly against someone where there's a child involved in the family scenario. So that makes a difference to an individual situation.
Is there kind of any special circumstances that anybody could find themselves benefiting from in any of these scenarios, that because they've got this enables them to have that? Is there anything that somebody might have a criteria that is going to help them?
Well, looking back on the private life application, the 20-year rule we were discussing, so someone who hasn't been here 20 years and has that requirement to show significant obstacles to reintegrating back home, we do have unique cases. They come up all the time. One example is a Pakistani national who was in the UK as a student for about 9 years. His history is that his family had left Pakistan when they were only a couple of years old and lived in Saudi Arabia for pretty much all his childhood and even his studies. There's no home in Pakistan. All the family members are in Saudi Arabia, and he's got nothing to go back to in Pakistan. Now, he can't take Saudi Arabian nationality. It's not something he can achieve. So his circumstances were put forward to the Home Office, someone who's been only really living in Saudi Arabia and the UK, and the country he would have to try and reintegrate into, the only country he could be returned to is Pakistan, and he qualified on the basis that it's somewhere he has no connection with. So although it's his nationality, although he has no other right to be in the UK, he qualified under the 20-year rule because there was an obstacle to him reintegrating in Pakistan.
So again, another complex situation, but there is a favourable outcome at the end, obviously, and obviously with your help. Is there any time that a case can be given an amnesty? Is there kind of where the slate is wiped clean and that you start again and going forward as a hopeful British citizen? Is the amnesty a word that's used these days?
Amnesty is a word that comes up literally every day. There'll be calls and inquiries. Is there an amnesty? Or I've heard about this amnesty.
Yeah.
There is no amnesty. There never really has been a formal amnesty. There have been a lot of informal amnesties where the Home Office have put plans in place and procedures in place internally to try and clear a backlog of cases and resolve immigration situations. It's unlikely, I think, for the time being, there'll be any amnesty. The last ones were for failed asylum seekers, and they abandoned that in 2011. So if you were granted a visa before that point, you were lucky, and anyone after that, too late, too bad. Other cases where there's children involved, again, up to 2011, they were clearing cases that hadn't been resolved, people who hadn't yet been removed. It's possible it comes up again. It comes down to politics. We'll see what happens with the general election.
Yeah.
One of my clients, I've seen Boris Johnson on a tube and said to him, do something for me. I've been here 10 years. And he goes, let me see. He was the mayor of London at that time. So let's see if he remains Prime Minister. There's some possibility that he'll try and do something for the possibly 700,000 or plus people in the UK who don't have any leave to remain, don't have a visa to be here.
Well, you see it in a lot of the parties, all of the parties, their manifestos it's quite a hot topic for them to debate and deal with properly, hopefully. Yeah. So again, from your side of it, general election comes up and laws, when if a new government takes over, or if, for instance, not getting political in this show, do laws change overnight, almost in some cases, or do they have to pass and say for visas, do they have to go through a certain structure before they become law or new law? It
depends on what area we're talking about. So the immigration rules, they are just rules that concern people coming and leaving the UK. Those can be changed by the government very quickly, within a matter of days and weeks, whereas proper laws have to be passed by Parliament. So the immigration rules specifically, government have got a lot of control of those. So there's a 1971 Act that Parliament passed. And beyond that, the government in place at the time, they can change that very quickly. So you could get a notice, an email today to say these changes are kicking in a week's time or 2 weeks' time, and that's it. The rules have changed, and you've now got to qualify under the new system. So immigration rules are very flexible. They'll change all the time, and a new government coming in don't need to pass a law in Parliament. So even with a hung Parliament, any government who's got control can change the rules very quickly without Parliament having to actually vote positively for those changes.
Well, you can actually see, with your description and how we've been speaking over these last minutes or so, is how difficult it is for somebody to even attempt to go down this road on their own. It literally, and even if you answered a question incorrectly by accident, that could mean that your visa could be turned down or not accepted. And that's why it's so important to come to see somebody like yourself.
Yeah, I mean, the mindset of the Home Office and the UK government for at least the last 7 or 8 years has been to find ways to refuse. So they were twisting the words of the application forms, the way that you would normally interpret what the immigration rules say. The courts have said themselves they were designed by nature to make things more difficult.
Yeah.
And that's just a government policy.
Quick question then. If somebody applies for a visa independently, or it comes through from with the backing of yourselves and apply for with your merit behind it, is it looked at any differently at all? Is it looked at that they've gone to the right course, they've seen a solicitor, they've gone through a specialist in this law, and he obviously believes they have a right for a visa, as opposed to somebody clonking away on their keypad at night time and just trying to get in for a visa? I mean,
I tell my own clients, and sometimes we get asked this question, that that's not the case.
Yeah.
The decision making will be independent, and it'll be regardless of whether or not a solicitor's helped you out. But the important thing here is the rules are so complex that people do have trouble on their own.
Yeah.
There are many applications people can process themselves, and the UK government's policy was we want them to do that. They wanted employers who are sponsoring workers to come and live in the UK and work in the UK to do everything on their own. But in practice, what they found out was they were getting caught out, silly mistakes on application forms, on interpreting what something meant. So they look at it the same way, but they may find it easier to find reasons to refuse the application.
Well, Sandy, quickly, already our time has run out. I have to say it's been a pleasure to meet you. First time on television, you did remarkably well. Thank you for all your insight, and it's been a pleasure to have you here at Legal Forum. Thank you very much. Well, that's, as I said, unfortunately all we have time for. I'd like to thank Sandeep, of course, for joining us here today. And as always, we must stress that the views and opinions expressed in Legal Forum should be considered for informational purposes only and not case-specific legal advice. All topics are discussed in a generic nature, and it's important that you consult either with a CAB, law centre or a solicitor before relying on it. As always, if you'd like to find out more about Legal Forum or the topic we've discussed today, then please do email us at legalforum@islamchannel.tv. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you next time. Assalamu alaikum.
This program is sponsored by Tilson Solicitors.